pronoun Z and zer, and what other sorts of gender-neutral pronouns are we discussing here?
Well, I have a very bad memory for that sort of thing, but if you're interested in it, you can find lists of them very rapidly on the web, and they've been produced by, I think, they've been produced by people whose essential desire is to gain linguistic control. That's as simply as I can put it, is to gain linguistic control. But they're not used popularly. And that seems to me to be it's a real problem as a consequence, that you make failure to make their use something that could carry a criminal penalty. So I just don't understand that. And I don't understand how the government can justify imposing a criminal penalty on the use of words that no one either knows or uses. It just seems preposterous to me, but there it is. Well, so I would say that the very idea that calling someone a term that they didn't choose causes them such irreparable harm that legal remedies should be sought, rather than regarding it as a form of impoliteness, that legal remedies should be sought, including potential violation of the hate speech codes, is an indication of just how deeply the culture of victimization has sunk into our society.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both of you for being here. I was trying to take notes, but I think I got this right, Mr. Peterson, that you talked about this bill as being an expression of the vanguard of ideology. Am I right in thinking?
Well, I was thinking more about the policies that surrounded it, but
Okay.
yes.
Yeah. So I'm trying to square what you, as a party of one, are saying with published documents from the Canadian Psychological Association, the American Psychological Association, the Canadian Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, the Canadian Psychiatric Association, and the United Nations Human Rights experts. So these are all, these are not parties of one. They are associated. They are all, I imagine, lots of psychologists are members of the Canadian Psychology Association and the Canadian Psychiatry. So how are we to square what you're saying, which is your opinion, which you are absolutely entitled to, with what everyone is saying, plus the feelings and testimonies of the people who have suffered over 30 years, who've been taking issues to court? These are people who we've listened to. So how are we to square this?
Okay, well, with regards to your second point, if the people that you're listening to aren't randomly selected from a population, then their opinions are worthless from the perspective of testimony, because you don't know if you're dealing with a biased sample. And that's a big problem with the public consultation process that underlied this bill. And you can not appreciate that if you'd like, but it's standard practice in any polling institution or any body that's attempting to extract a genuine opinion out of a so-called community of people. And if that isn't followed, then you can't tell if the information that you're receiving is biased. And this, with regards to your first point, what exactly are all those people who aren't thinking the same way as me saying? You said that there's a bunch of them and a bunch of groups, but you never said what they're saying precisely.
Well, I think our chair would rule me out of order if I proceeded.
No, you're fine.
To read out what they're all saying. But in general, they say they oppose discrimination and harassment because of gender identity and gender expression. And then there's 3 pages, which I can share with you.
I oppose discrimination against gender identity and gender expression. That's not the point. The point is the specifics of the legislation that surrounds it and the insistence that people will have to use compelled speech. That's what I'm objecting to. I've dealt with all sorts of people in my life, people who don't fit in all sorts of different ways. I'm not a discriminatory person. There's 500 hours of my teaching to my classrooms on tape on YouTube, and nobody's found a smoking pistol. I'm not a discriminatory individual, but I think this legislation is reprehensible, and I do not believe for a moment that it will do what it intends to do. I also don't think that my opinion deviates substantially from the bodies that you're describing, because you haven't provided any evidence that they say anything other than discrimination is a bad thing. And I think that unreasonable discrimination is a bad thing. And it's unreasonable when people are judged for any reason other than the specific competence that they bring to, say, a given position. It's not in anyone's best interest that that occurs. But I don't think that you've demonstrated in the least that the opinions that I'm putting forward exist in opposition to the standard practices, say, of my particular discipline.
members of the transsexual community that happen to agree with me, and with not with them. One of the things I always try to teach my students is that you can then look for what's wrong with the world. You should start by looking at what's wrong with you. Because you got So what I would recommend, perhaps, is that all of you who want to hear me talk, please go outside, okay, and I'll come outside and talk to you. And then somebody else carefully, and then whoever wants to stay in here on these sides can. But they're going to close this down, so let's try that, okay?
There's no reason whatsoever to presume that the laws that are being put in place to protect the people that these laws are supposed to protect will do anything that remotely resembles protecting them. And as I mentioned when we were in the hall, when I talked to you about the letters that I've received from transsexual people, they're very terrified about all of this because the vast majority of them want to be as invisible as everyone else wants to be. And all this does is draw negative attention to them. They're also not very happy about the fact that they're being represented noisily by people who have absolutely no right to speak for them. So, one of the things we really have to get over, and in a serious way, is the idea that just because you're talking to someone black or white or transsexual or homosexual, that you're speaking to a member of a homogenous tribe, and that the opinion that they happen to have is the opinion that all those who are like them share. There's nothing that's more racist than that assumption, right? Because it means that I don't have to know a damn thing about you except the most boring part of your identity. And I can predict everything that you are and everything that you think. Well, that's a terrible thing to believe. And it's also patently untrue. You know, there's no reason to assume that any group of people who don't fit into traditional society for some way are any more homogenous in their general makeup and their political views than any other group. In fact, all the evidence suggests precisely the contrary. And there's another thing I really don't like about identity politics, because it's really predicated on the idea that the only thing that's important about you is what's most obvious when I first look at you. And that's an appalling proposition. If only you could hear
your perspective about censoring these topics and about why it's important.
Why should your right to freedom of speech trump a trans person's right not to be offended?
Because in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive. I mean, look at the conversation we're having right now. You know, like you're certainly willing to risk offending me in the pursuit of truth. Why should you have the right to do that? It's been rather uncomfortable.
Well, I'm very glad I put you on the spot.
Well,
I'm very glad that I have exercised my freedom of speech.
You get my point. It's like you're doing what you should do, which is digging a bit to see what the hell's going on.
So
and that is what you should do. But you're exercising your freedom of speech to certainly risk offending me. And that's fine. I think more power to you as far as I'm concerned.
So you haven't sat there and I'm just trying to work that out. I mean,
ha, gotcha.
You have got me. You have got me. I'm trying to work that through in my head. Yeah. It took a while. It
did. Yeah.
It took a while. You have voluntarily come into the studio and agreed to be questioned. Mm-hmm. A trans person in your class has come to your class and said they want to be called
That's never happened. And I would call them she.
So you would. So you've kind of changed your tune on that.
No. I said that right from the beginning. What I said at the beginning was that I was not going to cede the linguistic territory to radical leftists, regardless of whether or not it was put in law. That's what I said. And then the people who came after me said, oh, you must be transphobic and you mistreat a student in your class. It's like, I never mistreated a student in my class. I'm not transphobic, and that isn't what I said. You know how it is when you're arguing with someone, there's a part of you that really wants to win. It's like, I'm right, you're stupid and wrong. And so the best way for me to demonstrate that is to warp and bend your argument in some
make it trivial in some way. It isn't, especially if it's directed to some degree at like elucidating my character flaws and to minimize you in doing so. And if you do that, of course, well, that's not a great road to peace unless you're willing to bring a big club to the argument, and many people are. And instead of listening and trying to make peace and sort things out, they'll use all sorts of subtle forms of suppression in their ensuing dialogue just to keep everything, you know, under the rug or in the closet. Well, you had to let people talk to find out what they thought, so they could find out what they thought, so they could move towards something, so they could move away from hell, because that's certainly what you see in clinical practice. I mean, people are suffering in ways you can hardly, well, you can probably imagine, because no doubt many of you have either been there or seen people who were there, lived with them. You know, to move away from that that's more real than anything else. If pain is more real than anything else, what's even more real than pain is whatever we have to fight off the pain. And that's free speech. It's identical with freedom of thought. It's associated with this capacity and necessity to listen deeply. They're flip sides of the same coin, to use a terrible cliche. The exchange of information like that, the generation of semantic and emotional information in a state of relative freedom, the revelation of those thoughts, and then the discursive analysis of those thoughts, say, and then the implementation into action and the testing of them, that is the pathway to health, insofar as that can be attained by, say, psychological or spiritual means. And so that's why free speech is not just another freedom or right among many. It's certainly not viewpoint diversity or anything like that. It's the mechanism by which we generate the conceptions that allow us to organize our experience in the world. It's that mechanism. And more than that, it's the mechanism that allows us to reformulate and criticize those conceptions when they've become outdated and sterile, to dissolve them into a chaos that we have to contend with while it's occurring, and then to reanimate them in a new form so that we can move into the future. And so if you're concerned with the oppressed, let's say, why in the world would you oppose free speech? It's the only thing the oppressed have.